Hello, this is the clock guy. I'd like to show you a beautiful clock today. This is a turn of the century regulator. This is actually a regulator clock, and I would like to show you the differences between regulators and the ones that say regulator on their windows. It is a New Haven. Jazz Age Pickup Jeweler, Newark, Delaware. So this was at a jeweler's shop. There's only one winding arbor, which is time only. No alarms or chimes. It is in oak. Very typical for a regulator. This looks almost exactly like the famous and highly sought after Seth Thomas Regulator number 2. They were extremely popular because they were pretty much the timekeepers at the turn of the century in the late 1800s. This can hold its own next to a Seth Thomas. They're usually locked so people couldn't steal things or adjust things. Also, you'll notice on regulators, they were screwed to the wall, so there'll be at least 1, 2, or 3 screw holes somewhere where they were screwed to the wall at one time, so they wouldn't be knocked back and forth. They were mostly put in railway stations. They need to be very accurate for the train schedules. They had this plate at the bottom to measure the time. Weight driven, of course. Not spring driven, because springs unwind at different rates, and then towards the end of the spring it will be running differently than towards the beginning of the winding. Many had a seconds hand. New Haven Clock Company, New Haven, Connecticut. It's an interesting logo right there. Interesting trademark. The 6-pointed star, New Haven, 1817 to 1853. So those are basically the things that make a regulator a regulator. I will take the face off and show you what else is inside. This clock still has the original gut wire on it, which is cool. It seems to be in good shape, so I'm not taking it off and replacing it. A lot of people replace it with brass wire. Someday this one may have to be, but right now this is as original as it gets, I think. Okay, so I removed the hands and the screws that hold the face on, so I'm going to remove the face. And that's what you see. Not much in there because it is a time-only movement. It doesn't have chimes or gongs or anything else. It's very basic because they want it to be very accurate. What helps make it actually 10 times more accurate than a typical clock of the era is this right here. That is called the escapement, and that is an anchor escapement. You could probably see why it's called that. It looks like an anchor, and interestingly, the man who invented the anchor escapement was an anchor maker in the 1650s. His name was William Clement, an Englishman, and With the anchor escapement, he changed timekeeping for the rest of history, where they used to measure time in hours. In fact, a lot of clocks at that time only had one hand, an hour hand. But with that anchor escapement, it allowed the clock to measure seconds. So it was a lot more accurate. A man called Graham came along and made this escapement right here, which is called a deadbeat escapement. So this is known as the Graham deadbeat escapement. You can see it by the symmetry of the anchor and the pallets on the anchor. The points on the wheel are actually facing forward, where regularly with an anchor escapement, the points would be tilting towards the back, and that is to allow it to push back each time a little bit as the pendulum hits the end of its curve. It will actually recoil a little. But this does not. As you can see, it's got a dead beat. It stops dead between each pulse. I know, I could watch it all day too, but we have to move on. So that is one of the main things that would make a regulator, because it is, as I said, 10 times more accurate than the regular recoil anchor escapement. Again, I've told you the other specific for a true regulator is it is weight driven. So there's no springs that unwind unevenly. Weights applying the same force consistently all the way to the end of its travel, which makes it much more reliable and accurate. Also, this beautiful clock has the original gut cable. I want to call it catgut, but not exactly sure. For some reason, I think it's like pig gut, or I'm not sure. I don't really deal with gut that often, so I have not researched it. I apologize. You can see a lot of it wound up here still. This is the way I got the clock, so I am keeping the gut on it because you don't really see gut that often. It's still in working condition. There's the famous tick, 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 tick. As you're winding it, you know, the clicking. That's the clicking sound. And interestingly, it is called the click. It is a work of art. Boy, I zoom in on these things and I just can't get anything done around the house. Whoa, look at that. Also with this, the mount is screwed to the back of the clock and the pendulum is attached to that, which will allow you to keep the pendulum on the clock if you take the movement off to service it. This is beautiful quarter sawn oak on the stick. It's a two-piece stick. So right there you can remove the bottom half of the pendulum rod. And way down there is a very heavy bob. And would you like to know why it's called a bob? Okay, I'll tell you. I know you were thinking, gee, I wonder why it's called a pendulum bob. It's because prior to the anchor escapement, the pendulum's travel was so far from side to side that it would actually bob out of the sides of the clocks. And they called it a bob because it would, like, as it swung, it would come out here. It would swing very far. And that's where they got the name, the pendulum bob. Not to be confused with the I'm getting giddy bob right before you pass out on the golf course, which is a funny story in itself, and you should probably go to Freakin' Frugal and listen to that one if you want to hear a really funny golf story. I mean, ridiculously funny. My wife has a channel, Freakin' Frugal, and she was asking me about something I said to her one time because I bent over and I got lightheaded, and I said, "Well, I'm getting giddy, Bob." She said, "What are you talking about?" And I told her the story on the on her channel. So go find Freakin' Frugal and look that up. Okay, I'll put this back together. So that is.
Hello! Come on. I snuck up behind you.
Yes, you did. So that is a New Haven wall regulator in oak, weight driven, hung in a jewelry store in Newark, Delaware for many, many years, I'm sure. And this is the clock I say. Thanks for watching.